Zelda.
It's an anniversary. This game came out a long time ago.
30 years ago.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Yep. Japan. It turns 30, I guess, this week Sunday. You know, simultaneously making a lot of people feel very old and also stirring nostalgia in their bosom, as it were. I didn't grow up playing Zelda games. My first one was actually, I guess, the GameCube one. So Phantom. I was about to say Phantom Pain. Not Phantom Hourglass. Wind Waker. Yeah. Sorry, Wind Waker was the first Zelda game I ever played.
Which is the one that holds up the best. Like when you look at it, like graphically,
it does look really good. Yeah.
They made this cel shaded graphic, and like at the time, like we all derided it as being this kind of crappy looking kiddie game. Like this isn't Zelda that I know. But now when you look back at it, you're like, this still looks amazing. Like that cel shading was such a great idea for making a long lasting game.
It was crazy because the trailer they showed for like what the GameCube could do with Zelda was the more realistic, like Twilight Princess-esque art style. And then they came out of left field. But yeah, it's great. It's so different and it stands out.
30 years, so we're obviously going to make a big deal about it on GameSpot. There's a bunch of really cool features going up later on this week.
We're obviously going to do it because it's our job.
I mean, Pokemon's a week after that.
Yeah.
It's just, that's what it's going to be now. It's going to be anniversaries after anniversaries. But like, not many games have the staying power of like 30 years. Like, it's such a long time. You think about those early NES games. You think about, like, we were saying beforehand about all the crappy ones, like the Philips, was it CDI games that released. Like, they had some...
It was a misstep, but that was a misstep that was giving it to another developer.
Right.
And it's not that they didn't ever do that again, because you had like Oracle of the Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, and those were done by completely different development studios.
Capcom.
But it made them really distrust American developers for a while, I think.
So do you think what is the staying power of a franchise like this? Like for 30 years, to keep that quality bar, is it just that Nintendo are super protective of their games and they just do right by them?
I think they were able to identify what people liked about the original, and I think they learned a lot about that from the second game because it was so different. And I think those two games combined informed somewhat of a formula for the series that Nintendo has pretty much stuck to for the most part. And even if they deviate and do something a little bit different with some of the more experimental games like Four Swords and the like, they still always come back to the one that everyone knew and loved, and in doing so, they're giving people what they want, really, and then they innovate once in a while and surprise everyone.
Yeah, they do that great job of having a core experience. Like no matter what, when you get into it, you know there's going to be a Link, there's going to be Zelda, there's almost always going to be Ganon, but they're able to experiment in ways that Nintendo does so well, and they do the same thing with Mario. That each of those games feels fresh and new in exciting ways, while still keeping that core. Here's the theme, and you get the music, and you're like, oh, this is a Zelda game, and I'm so excited to be in this character again.
It's kind of this weird thing where Mario is like the quintessential 2D platformer experience, and then when everyone else tries to make a 2D platformer, they can't just make Mario. They have to like do something fresh with it. Whereas Mario kind of just has this like nice column of this like traditional gameplay that people know. And Zelda's almost kind of a similar thing where it's like every video game. You start off as this low powered character and then you collect things and you go adventuring places and you find new areas and you get better abilities. They've almost like cornered the market on this thing that just works so good for video games.
Yeah.
So then they can, I guess, iterate in different ways without losing too much of that core gameplay, I guess.
And it's also how they tinker with Hyrule itself. Because Hyrule is always somewhat familiar, like, yeah, it's a kingdom, sort of like a medieval kind of a feel to it, like in a way. Still very fantasy, but it also changes quite a bit over time as well. And even the sort of, like, the laws of, physics that define that world also change. It's like they're just really good at sort of taking that thing that everyone knows, like you were saying, the core, and just twisting it a little bit to keep us interested.
And they do something that I think Final Fantasy is like Square tries to do with Final Fantasy, where you have a core idea, like this is magic and these are people who are going to explore a world. But I feel like over the years, they've changed so much that it's almost unrecognizable to someone who played the original Final Fantasy.
Yes.
Whereas Zelda is very recognizable.
Same characters.
You're in not only the same character, you're in the same world. It's like now I'm just in this world that's put into 3D. And that's something that's very... Like for me, like having grown up with it, like I get into this world and I understand it immediately. Whereas, and someone who's getting into it for the first time, like they understand this in a whole new way, but in a way that relates to them as like, here are the game experiences that I've already had, and they're a lot of fun.
Right, yeah, just like Madden. Bunch of great comments coming through here on the Twitch chat, on the GameSpot chat. And Munchchomp says, it just had so many standout moments in Ocarina of Time. No other game in the franchise really had that story hit after it. For you guys, what were your favorite Zelda games? Ocarina of Time, obviously, the first first 10 out of 10 on GameSpot back in, it was 1998, I guess.
That's a lot of people's favorites.
Yeah,
But for me, it's always been Majora's Mask. Like, Majora's
Interesting.
Mask took the ideas of Zelda and put it into an adventure game wrapper. Like, I love adventure games, having grown up with, like, old PC adventure games.
Sierra or Lucas?
Sierra.
Okay.
But
Weirdo.
it took those ideas and like made it into a 3D world where the purpose was still like you're still getting stronger, you're still collecting items and weapons, and you have the great combat and music of Zelda. But it's more about interacting with people and exploring and talking and trying to figure out this world. It's like the perfect adventure game, and I think the 3DS version just made that even better. Like being able to explore things and figure out what you need to do and where you need to go. Like it was such an improvement on that. So for me, yeah, Majora.
Link to the Past, which is difficult because I really love the original Zelda so much. That was the one I grew up with, and as a young kid, I didn't really know how to like complete the game, but I enjoyed the adventure. But A Link to the Past was when I was kind of like competent enough to like take a video game, understand it, see it through to the end, and I still find the art style really charming. I still find the two different worlds, like the light and the dark world, very interesting because it's the same place but different. And I think they did that at a time when it wasn't really a thing that developers did. Yeah, no.
Well, like I remember you were getting through that, and you think you beat the game like really early on. Like, oh, I'm here. I'm gonna beat the bad guy, and I saved the princess. Like, holy shit, there's a whole other world.
Then you go on a crazy trip, and you're in like the apocalypse.
It's like no wonder you like Metal Gear Solid 5.
Yeah, and you know, even again, I think that game established for the series, like when you explore and you run into something that you realize, like, I don't know what to do here, but I know that I will find a solution that will make me want to come back.
You're talking about like
A Link to the Past.
To the Past, yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, just you encounter like a wall you can't break, or like a waterfall that like you can see that you can go through. You're like, why can't I go through that waterfall? Like, what is the thing I'm missing? And then eventually you find the tool and you can do it again. It's a lot like the Metroid formula, and I think those two games share a lot in common. But because of their perspective, people don't usually compare them. But they're very similar.
It's interesting. Some folks in the chat were saying that as well, and saying how Recore is a game that seems to be sort of taking some ideas from those as well and applying them. A Link Between Worlds, then, I guess, sort of an echo of A Link to the Past, 2013 Game of the Year for GameSpot.com as well.
It did such a good job of distilling all those elements that worked for the traditional kinds of Zelda, like include the first one, Ocarina of Time, or not Ocarina of Time, A Link to the Past, but making it feel very fresh and modern. And I really love the way that it approached dungeons. That up to this time, we'd always thought of the dungeon as like, here's the place where I go and I get the item and then I can find the next dungeon. This one was basically, you have all the items, you have all the tools that you need right in front of you. Explore and do whatever you want with those. Like that was such a fun way to change up that formula.
Briefly, let's talk about some of the stinkers. What were the game? Maybe like, okay, number one, explicitly bad games. I'm guessing those CDI.
Hand of Fate's Wand of Gamelon.
Wand of Gamelon, yeah.
Those were just those aren't even Zelda games.
Was it the cartoon, or was it that was the "Will excuse me, princess"?
That's from one of those games.
That was from the cartoon.
But
the art style is is even worse. Like it makes the cartoon look good, which is mind-boggling. Like I don't even know who could have greenlit this. Like no one at Nintendo was like, "This is a good idea."
Yeah.
But someone had to have made this and drawn all of this and gone like, "Let's make another game. This is so much fun and cool."
The voice acting is awful as well.
bad.
It's atrocious.
I bet I was like lost in translation or something, where they just didn't have the good people, Nintendo of America or something, keeping an eye over it, and
and they did a lot of drugs. If you look at it, there had to be mushrooms. Something.
Excuse me, drug dealer. And then I guess games that sort of maybe didn't reach the high watermark set by the game.
When I was younger, I did not like Zelda 2 at all.
Oh, no, here it is. Look, actually, this is
God.
yeah.
Like, it's just so.
Look at that, Jesus Christ!
Like it's embarrassing. Like that's the
There
kind
are
of
the
thing.
drugs.
Freddy Krueger.
If you made it, you're like, I'm not going to put that on my resume.
That is that his bong? Your bong now.
God, it just awful.
Yeah, I couldn't wrap my head around Zelda 2 either. It was so. I mean, the first game was kind of obtuse anyway, but this one was just like. It was such a departure that anything that I thought I had learned from the original game was just thrown out the window. Like on the overworld map, the first time I remember running into an enemy, and then it transported me to this like 2D perspective. It was just like, how does that make sense? Like before I was engaging in the moment with that enemy. Now I'm put into a level that has multiple enemies just because I ran into one on the map. It was so strange.
It was more for me. It was because of the challenge. Like I was not used to that kind of gameplay, and it was a very challenging game. It was very punishing. Like if you screw up, you're going back to the beginning. Like wow, it was almost a roguelike in that sense, where you have to know what you're doing and get through it in the number of lives that you had. for me, like, I don't think I could have beat the ending when I was a child without Nintendo Power. I don't know how you would have thought, like, you have to turn into a fairy and then fall through this very specific bridge that go through a keyhole, and then you have a specific lightning spell that you need to use against the final enemy, or else it's not going to do anything, because that spell never does anything else at any other point in the game. Like, what?
Really?
Ah.
Beautiful.
It's not my favorite.
Especially in an age before the internet. 30 years, long time. Last one on this, Luna9 in the Twitch chat saying, I was so lucky that Ocarina was the first game I ever played back when I was 4 or 5. To which Prepared Death says, wow, 4 or 5 makes me feel old. 30 years. To 30 more years of Zeldas.